Well, good morning. My name is Chris Jones. I'm with the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension in Gila County, and I'd like to welcome you for joining me today. I'm doing the Garden and Country Extension webinar series, and today's topic is Firewise landscape principles in the Sonoran Desert. Just a little bit about these webinars. They're a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11 in Arizona. If you're from out of the state, please pay attention to the time zone. These webinars feature a variety of horticultural and natural resource topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County, Arizona, and anywhere else. Gila County has a fair amount of Sonoran desert and scrubland, so very appropriate for this county. And a recording of this will be posted at arizona.edu, extension.arizona.edu/Gila, or you can email me at ckjones@arizona.edu. We have a YouTube playlist where all of these webinars go, and that's a good archive to see them. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. And with that, I'm going to throw up the poll to get just a little information. I think so. So if you just take a moment to answer those three questions, and as soon as you do that, I'm sure it'll pop off your screen. That'll take care of that. Let me get this back up here. Move. Here's our agenda for today. Thank you for logging in early if you did. I'm Chris Jones, your moderator and presenter. The topic today is Firewise landscape principles in the Sonoran Desert. We'll have an opportunity for a Q&A discussion, and if we continue to be a small group, I'll just give everybody a chance to talk and bring you on. And we'll wrap up the discussion here by noon and get us off to lunch. Here I am, your presenter. I am an extension agent with the University of Arizona in Gila County. So good to be with you all today. Okay, I'll stop that share and I'll bring up my slides for the presentation and get started here. So the kind of adapted title here, Planning and Maintaining Firewise Landscapes. This was a presentation I put together for the Desert Horticulture Conference my colleague, Dr. Ursula Schuch, puts together for the landscape community and commercial hort community in Arizona. I also want to just briefly mention the Arizona Fire Adapted Communities Network. We are a group that tries to get together practitioners and others who deal with wildfire to kind of have an opportunity to network, talk with each other across the state, find out what types of things they're doing to be more successful and be able to share resources. So if another thing I participate in. And today for our agenda, going to discuss a little bit about wildfire in the Sonoran Desert, how homes ignite, hazard assessments, Firewise plant materials, home ignition zones, and just a slide on the resources and materials that you can get all that information at one spot, do a screenshot or take a picture. So getting into wildfire, particularly in the Sonoran Desert, in the 20th century and before, wildfire in the Sonoran Desert was infrequent and definitely patchy. It'd be pretty small. We can see that that's changed a lot, particularly in the 21st century. And I'm attaching that to what I'm calling Arizona's 21st century drought. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain this graph here. It is called a standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index. It is current. I just put this together, so it ends every 12 months ending in the October, which is a typical water year in Arizona. And you can see on this graph going back to 1895 when we started taking records in Arizona, we've had some wetter years, some drier years, and then a pretty pronounced drought that we've been in since the late 90s. So in this graph that it just looks at precipitation and evapotranspiration, just want you to take a look at this here, which shows precipitation in Arizona. That you can see that we've always had wet and dry years in Arizona. We can see that we're in an extended drought here as far as precipitation goes, and a very dry period that occurred in the 50s, that a well-known drought in Arizona. So as far as it being wet or dry, we get these all the time. And so that really hasn't changed much in Arizona. What has changed is it's much warmer. The temperatures have changed. And so what that has an impact on is evapotranspiration. And just briefly, that has to do with evaporation that comes directly from the soil and the plant transpiration that comes out of the plants. And in Arizona, we have a higher reference ET or potential evapotranspiration than what is available. So when it's very hot and dry out there, any moisture that can be available is taken up by the atmosphere. And so that evaporation requires energy. So, if you want to boil water, you turn on the stove in a pot and it boils. You want to dry clothes, you put it in the dryer, it dries the clothes. So that energy that drives evapotranspiration or evaporation is from heat. And so this graph here shows how the temperatures have changed in Arizona since we started records in 1895. You can see that particularly here in the 1990s, it's gotten much warmer than what we've seen in the past. And we had a bit of a cooler period here in the 70s, and you can see it's just consistently gotten warmer. Another thing that I want to show on this graph is what is considered the normal period. From 1989 to 2010, this previous 10-year or 30-year normal is a convention of the way that meteorology is done, the way they take temperatures. So this is always kind of brought up into the last normal period. And now that we're getting into 2020, that's going to go from 1990 to 2020 here soon. Had this normal period been 1970 to 2000, this would look drastically a lot more in the red. This temperature increase is being driven by the greenhouse effect due to fossil fuels being burned. It's supercharged by the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide and methane gases that we have in the atmosphere. So let's put those two together. Precipitation and evapotranspiration to create this index. You can just see again how together that additional heat has had such a more severe impact on the amount of moisture that's available in our environment, even compared to that drought period that we had in the 50s. So the other factor is fire in the Sonoran Desert has to do with non-native invasive plants that have gotten established in the Sonoran Desert during the 21st century and previously. Many of them been here for decades and decades before they've gotten to the populations that they have now. So some of the things that have to do with that is this drought has given these non-native plants a real competitive edge. And again, Michael, thank you for these slides. I'm going to be using these here. And so why are we experiencing invasive weed issues during a time of record drought in Arizona? If you take a look at this image here, this is a native soap tree yucca, I believe. and the rodents take advantage of that and just puts a lot of pressure on these on the native plants. So the native plants, even though they're drought adapted, they are experiencing persistent drought, which puts a lot of stress on them. When non-native plants come in, they come from another part of the world, Africa, the Mediterranean, other parts that have similar climates as Arizona. And back where they were native, they had certain insects, certain diseases, certain herbivores that would put impact pressure on them. They don't get that pressure here. So that just allows them to be much more successful. Also talking about these non-native plants, well, let me just use this graph here. This is good. One project my colleague Michael Chamberlain's been working on is raising awareness about a plant called stinknet. And it is a winter annual that took great advantage of the heavy rains that we had in 2019 and 2020 during the winter that really allowed this plant to take off. It's got a little flower that produces thousands of seeds. Those seeds go into the ground, the conditions are right, they are able to take off. So particularly we're seeing these non-native winter annuals being very successful at taking over large areas of the Sonoran Desert and then being available to carry wildfire. So they just really good, just a blanket of it across the ground. Another example, and this has really been a problem in Gila County, is red brome. And red brome's been in the state for many decades, perhaps the 50s, if not before that. And it's an annual non-native grass. It helped to fuel the Cave Creek complex fire in 2005. Again, it gets established with some fall rains in October, November, when we get some hurricanes that may come up here. Those grasses get started. They hold on through the winter months. And then when it starts to warm up, we get some spring rain. They're able to take advantage of that and grow. What these winter annuals do is then die in April, May, as soon as it starts to warm up. So they've got no competition again with the native plants, and they dry out. Take a look at this picture though. This is red compost. This is red brome back in 2005 across the field. You can see it kind of clumpy. And now look at this picture here. This is that red brome in Tano Basin in 2019. It just created quite a blanket across any void of vegetation that was in Tano Basin. And it fueled the woodbury fire that we had in 2019. That was followed by the bushfire, the telegraph fire, and a lot of that is being spread because of this grass and not having the winter conditions to get cold enough to knock it down after it's dried out. Another non-native plant to be concerned about in the Sonoran Desert is bufflegrass. Rather than being a non-native winter annual, it is a perennial summer. It likes the warm weather and grows when it's warm. So it's perennial, it's a bunch grass, and it's got stolons or rhizomes. It really spreads very well, gets well established in the Sonoran Desert. There's a very large issue in Pima County. It does kind of, doesn't like too much cold. So when we start getting above 3,500 feet, 4,000 feet, it drops out. But it's carried some terrible fires. Look at this saguaro. An important thing to understand about wildfire in the Sonoran Desert is our iconic saguaro is not fire adapted. When we have these wildfires in the Sonoran Desert, keep in mind that a saguaro, when it is 10 years old, is about 2 to 3 inches tall. So any of that cohort of young saguaro cacti perish, and we do not see them come back into the landscape as long while the wildfires occur every 10 or 15 years. So one thing that's going to be very important for dealing with wildfire in the Sonoran Desert is something we call integrated weed management. And future control against noxious weeds and the non-natives we mentioned can be expected or hoped. We can do it through integrated weed management techniques. And funding for weed management areas is needed. And this is simply perhaps by county or watershed. Each of the management agencies come together, coordinate their efforts so that they can be dealing with weeds as a regular part of their program. We really need a lot of funding to do that as we see the type of wildfires that occur now. Likely to involve heightened public awareness, vigilant mechanical removal of weeds, careful sanitation, clearing of dried brush, and selective use of herbicides. And biological control is a possibility for defense, but we really need a lot more research. So that's for another talk another time. All right, how do homes ignite? So that's just kind of talk about wildfire in the Sonoran Desert. And so it all has to do with the wildfire behavior. We've got three factors that we deal with: the fuels, topography, and weather. Of course, it impacts the human environment. We are concerned that our homes are going to catch on fire, other structures that are of importance. And so where we have structures in the human environment where wildfires occur has a factor. And the only thing we really can control is fuels and perhaps human behavior. So we can be doing things that can help control those fuels, helps to control wildfire behavior. And one big thing that's happened in the Sonoran Desert is how these grasses have moved in and created a type of ladder fuel. And when we look at ladder fuels, this is what takes fire that can occur at the ground level and lead to the crowns. So leads from crown and surface fires. It can spread fire directly to your home. And when we talk about ladder fuels, the idea is to remove those rungs. So in this situation where we have all these grasses growing underneath mesquite, if we're able to take that out with lawnmowers, weed eaters, that can make a big difference. So ladder fuel, this vegetation, dry, dead, and living, that allows fire to move from lower plants to taller ones. And the remedy is to separate layers of vegetation by removing lower tree branches, mid-height shrubs, and cutting weeds and grasses, particularly in the Sonoran Desert. Another thing about fuel is that our homes are fuel, and more houses burn due to embers than any other cause. So rather than a flame front coming and catching your house on fire, it's usually these embers that pick up in a wildfire, which are glowing hot sparks and firebrands. They get lofted into the air by the fire's convective winds, and then they get dropped, into our homes. And so they are often leaves, small branches, tree bark, pine cones, any of these embers that can get picked up and carried. Under severe wildfire conditions, these embers can carry a half a mile. They can carry over a mile. So, and when we have these big wildfires under severe conditions. So a remedy is to remove those fuses or pathways by which embers or flames can ignite a built structure. And we'll be getting into that about home ignition zones here in just a moment. Okay, another thing about fire behavior is topography. And when we talk about some of the distances that we need to work around our homes for the home ignition zones, we look at slope by the vegetation type. And so in the desert where we have these wildland grasses and non-native grasses, if you don't have a great deal of slope, as much as 30 feet out from the house can be sufficient to help buffer the home ignition zone. But if you have any type of elevation, that can go as much as 100 feet. Where in Chaparral in Arizona, The types of plants that grow in there are particularly volatile. If you think of manzanita and shrub oak, these burn very hot, the pinyon and juniper type. And so even 100 feet is necessary on a flat land up to 20-foot slope, and 200 feet. So really cleaning out those areas if you're living in a steep area. And then if we're in a treed area, a forest area, such as mixed conifer, ponderosa, or pinyon juniper, 30 feet may be enough on a flat slope, and then up to 100, and then at least 100 feet out at more steeper slopes. And then weather. And so this here, if you'll notice, this is what we call the 10-hour fuel moisture. This is any of the twigs and branches that are between 1/4 inch to 1 inch thick. If you're starting a fire, campfire, this is what we would call the tinder. You put in there, you get that ignited, it helps to ignite the rest of the fire. This is our fuel moisture for that's 10-hour fuels for today, December 8. And you can see that much of the southern Arizona is 5 to 6%, even up here on the rim, 7 to 8% moisture. So very dry conditions, even in December. And want to be sure we understand what the wildland-urban interface is. I've been tossing that term around. And one of the terms is where the leaves meet the eaves. It's where your house is going to be next to wildland. And so I really like this continuum of wildland to rural to suburb, kind of residential, and then down into a town center. And any of these places can be subject to wildfire because of how embers can move. So they have those different terms, but just that idea of what a wildland-urban interface is. And some of the issues that we deal with in wildland-urban interface includes the structure, density, and location, number of structures allowed in an area at risk for wildfire. Setbacks have a lot to do, how far are homes apart from each other or other features, and setback from slopes. The types of building materials we use, the roof assembly, the eaves, the vents, the gutters, these have a lot to do with how homes are able to catch on fire. The vegetation management, tree thinning and spacing, the ladder fuels, emergency vehicle access. Can fire trucks get into where people have homes? Do we have driveways? Do we have turnarounds? Do we have ingress and ingress and egress to be able to get in and out of places? Address markers so that emergency services are able to find places. Is water available? And then types of fire protection that may be available. So sprinkling systems, fire hydrants, just other protection features that are typical concerns when we talk about wildland-urban interface issues. Okay, so what can we be doing? I want to get into some hazard assessments. Here's a very Firewise home here. You can see that it's the chaparrals here, and the home's got a lot of buffer to keep embers from allowing it to ignite. So just a good example. So a home hazard assessment is also called a Firewise assessment. It is a tool that's used to evaluate the risk to wildfire of a structure or a property. They'll look at the access. We talked about ingress and egress, how to get out, available fire protection. So if you got a fire department nearby, if you got the fire hydrants, the vegetation structure characteristics, and structure. And so if you get one of these home assessments done, they'll provide suggestions on how you can reduce the ignition potential. And who does hazard assessments? There are trained assessors and advisors. Our Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management puts together annual trainings in communities so that the local fire department and others can get trained to be assessors. Homeowners can do this, help with education, and volunteers. I'm going to have a slide at the end of the presentation with email with the websites for Arizona Department of Fire Management, so that'll be coming up here soon. All right, let's move on here. We're going to talk about some of the Firewise plant materials. And I am a huge fan of the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association's plant list. It is really an excellent list of all plants that you can use in the Sonoran Desert. If you find this website here and really just AMWA plants, it'll pop up. Very interactive, great tool for plants in Phoenix, Tucson, Sonoran Desert areas. So what is a Firewise plant? Well, first, if it's organic, if it's carbon-based, no plant is fireproof, it can catch on fire. But the idea is that it's going to be less likely to burn. It may burn less hot or for less time. That can be useful as a Firewise plant. It may require less maintenance. That's a good thing too. It may be slower in growth. So again, lower maintenance. And plant selection is important, but not as important as landscape design and maintenance. Certainly these non-native grasses we're talking about will burn less hot and for less time, but the way that they're set up on the landscape, they allow fires to burn from one place to the next. So a lot of detail we need to get into on Firewise plants. So which ones are the best? Anything that's considered low oil or low resin content is best. When we get into our chaparral and conifers, these are plants that have a lot of resins and waxes in them so that they can cut down on evapotranspiration and be able to survive in our arid climate. Deciduous trees are less combustible, so using trees that drop their leaves in the winter are good choices. Grasses, cacti, ground covers, and wildflowers are all considered Firewise plants. They just need to be maintained and mowed during the fire season. There's a need to maintain and keep fire resistance. And I'm going to go over this more than once. Eliminate those ladder fuels. These spread fire from ground into the tree canopy. So grass under trees, shrubs under decks, trees and shrubs under decks or eaves. So just that opportunity for fuel to move from the ground up into the trees or your structure. Now, the good news is most native plants are fire resistive because several have high moisture or low oil resin contents. Many are deciduous. They drop their leaves. The leaves have higher moisture content and there's less fuel when they are dropped. They can shed their leaves or needles under extreme drought. They have smaller or very succulent leaves. That's a big feature of many of our Sonoran desert plants. They may not accumulate large amounts of dead branches or needles or leaves. That's a feature that you want to look for. Often it just takes some additional management. They may have loose or open branches with low volume of vegetation. They can reestablish after fires, such as bear grass or others. They'll come back after a fire, and they could be drought tolerant and thus easier to keep green. So this wolfberry, when it's got moisture, nice and dry, that looks like a good plant. Many of these low water use plants are fire resistant, but some aren't. Keep an eye out for whatever is particularly aromatic. So rosemary would not be a good choice for a hedge next to the house because it's got a lot of aromatics in it, and if it catches on fire, it will burn very hot. Eucalyptus, the true salvias. These are all, anything that's just kind of has that scent, you can know that they're going to be particularly aromatic. They're going to have a lot of oils and resins available. Watch out for the accumulation of dead branches and plant material. This buckhorn cholla, I think, is an excellent Firewise plant, but this one in particular is very mature. You can see a lot of dead canes underneath it. So if you're able to come in here, clean that out, allow the native plants to come up, the branches that are green to remain, you still have a beautiful buckhorn cholla. What I like about this one in particular, it has structure. It gets a little bit of height to it, and just a real, all these cactus have beautiful flowers. And then they can be overgrown or continuous. So it's just cleaning that out where this creosote is right next to this cholla, just being able to just do a little maintenance on those. They remain beautiful plants to work with. And just a little talk about how a fire-prone plant may be the best choice. When you talk with wildfire firefighters dealing with these desert fires, they look at the soap tree yucca and the sodal, and they've had some real troubles with those, or the desert spoon, because when these catch, the fibrous heart of the plant, you know, that structure that's in it, can actually carry can warm up, can get a lot of, can continue to smolder and burn. And there's been situations where particularly the sodal may get burnt down, but it's still burning on the inside. It weakens up from below and then can tumble down and keep fires going. So, but on the other hand, these are great plants that don't require any maintenance in there, particularly in the Globe Miami area. And so it's taking care of them. So in this here, a poorly maintained or inappropriate sited fire-resistant plant may be more appropriate than a hazardous plant, well maintained and properly located. So these here, they make excellent accent plants, use them. And if you've got some rocks or a swale underneath them to keep them from rolling, that can make a big difference. And if they're up above the home where they can roll into the home, then you may want to consider removing them. So just a little maintenance on it. Different types of plants that you're going to find in that AMWA list are ones that are ground covers, others that are vines, cacti, succulents, grasses, perennials, and annuals that you can work with. If you're familiar with the tufted evening primrose, these come up beautifully in the spring. These tend to stay as small plants that are 1 to 2 feet. They kind of die down in the heat of the summer. These are pretty good choices for Firewise plant. All right, let's get into a few more specifics about those. We're going to talk about the home ignition zone. And this is research that has been done through the U.S. Forest Service, the National Institute on Fire Center, a lot of work on here. So the research they've done, there's what they call the immediate zone, which is 0 to 5 feet from the structure, which is where embers can catch a house on fire. What you do in the intermediate zone, which is 5 to 30 feet out, and then the extended zone, which goes from 30 to 100 feet back out. And this is important regardless of what type of vegetation you live in. It's a universal vision. So let's talk about these zones. I think I just described that. Here's another example where if you've got a structure, a deck, that's part of your intermediate zone, your immediate zone. The trees you may put out in the immediate zone, or a garden that you may have in here. Notice that the propane tank is kept outside of that intermediate zone and into the extended zone. So let's talk about that immediate zone, 0 to 5 feet from the structure. The goal here to have no risk of ember. So if we have wildfire around the house, those embers are blowing towards the house, they're not able to find a place to be able to ignite the structure. What we recommend here are detachable garden boxes, pots and containers, because then if a wildfire is coming, you're able to move those to another place, out into the intermediate zone, out into beyond the intermediate zone, or into your garage or home, and protect them. And you should only have fire-resistant plants in this area: perennials, small shrubs, cacti, herbs, vegetables, and accents, and then mostly landscape elements. A non-combustive deck, pavers. This is the type of, that image I showed earlier shows kind of the ideal of this immediate zone. And briefly, I want to show this ember awareness checklist. It was put together by my extension colleagues, the University of Nevada, several years ago. They've got 22 different points to look at. This ember awareness checklist is available at my website, and I did an entire presentation on this back in May. So you can watch a presentation, get into details about these opportunities in that 0 to 5 immediate zone from the house. And some of the AMWA container plants that would be appropriate for this zone includes the spruce cones. Here's that image of spruce cones. I've been growing that here in Gila County. It does very well. Candelia can take a fair amount of cold. Elephant's food, probably not. Ice plant can take quite a bit of cold. Myoporum. Aloe makes an excellent container plant. Yellow bubani, very easy to take care of. Red Justicia. The list is longer, and so just some good choices there. All right, let's move on to what we call the intermediate zone. This is from 5 to 30 feet from the structure, and you want a low flame risk. And in this area, you're going to be using smaller ornamental plants and shrubs. You may have grass or a lawn patch, ground covers. It should be yard-like. It's just going to take out a lot of those plants that are going to be able to carry the fire. Vegetables and herb gardens are excellent in this area. Dwarf fruit and smaller deciduous trees are very good in the intermediate zone, and they should be at least 15 feet tall. Everything that you have in this area should be pruned and controlled. Any of the native plants and non-native grasses and weeds. And those landscape structures that you should have in this area include driveways, the use of gravel, walking paths, patios, and even walls make a good barrier. They don't need to be privacy walls. A 2 or 3 foot wall can create a barrier where if fire is burning on the outside, it comes and hits that wall and then doesn't carry into your structure. So ideas there. Of course, it has to be a non-combustible wall. So in that area, let's just a little bit about some pruning guidelines. You should keep shrubs a minimum of 10 feet away from the lower edge of tree branches and remove grasses and other vegetation growing underneath tree limbs. So looking at this configuration here, it eliminates those ladder fuels. For mature and tall trees, prune those lower branches up to 6 to 10 feet off the ground. So if it's kind of a smaller tree, get it 6 feet off the ground. Again, get rid of those ladder fuels. A large tree can be 10 feet where you're walking underneath it. Being able to walk underneath trees is a good one. If they're smaller or younger trees, prune the lower branches up from the ground, but don't exceed about 1/3 of the plant's overall height. You could kind of damage the plant, kind of turn into a lollipop, get too tall, and just get that where you can control the grasses underneath here, about 1/3 of that height. Just some general rules on pruning. Also in this intermediate zone from the AMWA plant list, small trees and shrubs for this area would include Arizona yellow bells, beautiful deciduous plant here. You can see the green leaves, beautiful flowers. Kidney wood, we had that image earlier. Orchid tree, Mexican buckeye, cascolote, featherbush, guajillo, yellow bird of paradise, superstition mallow, Baja ruelia. These all make good choices. And just some images here that from the AMWA website as far as some landscape ideas. They've got this ocotillo with some barrel cactus and the primrose here. And what I like about this is we know that this primrose is a good spring or winter flower. And you'll have these beautiful flowers before the fire season really kicks in, and then they'll kind of dry out, get those down to the ground. The roots will still be there and come back next winter or spring. So I think this is really a neat idea. Notice how they have the kind of the wall here as a planter, and then this one over here, just lots of opportunities to kind of break up the opportunity for fire to flow. And this one, much more simple, but again, at Hesperaloe, barrel cactus, a lot of stone. They got the blue stone here to kind of give a water type of look. We've got a walkway, gravel, just that doesn't burn. Moving along here, let's talk about what we call the extended zone, which will go from 30 feet to 100 feet from the house. The idea is to have a low risk of a crown fire and the grass fire that we have in the Sonoran Desert. Should be a mix of natives and or fire resistant plants. Shade trees are excellent to have at that 30-foot area. Desert trees and shrubs. Thin and prune up overgrown native trees and shrubs. And then most importantly, pull or mow and bag up native and non-native annual grasses and weeds. Just try to keep those weeds under control when we're all dried out. I'm a big fan of the honey locust. It gets a beautiful color. It's got in the fall, it's got a compound leaf that in my climate here, it's kind of late putting on its leaves and kind of early to drop them. So it gives you that shade in the summer when you want it, and then allows the sunlight to come in during those cooler months. And this here talks about tree spacing, where we really aren't having trees right here in that 0 to 5 zone if possible. If you do, they have to be considered part of the structure. How to space them out in that intermediate zone. Trees and clumps of trees should have a minimum of 18 feet between the tree tops. So you can have clumps of trees together, but then some space in between. That extended zone, trees and clumps of trees should have a minimum of 12 feet between the tree tops, so that they can be a little bit closer, and then out into kind of the wild area, at least 6 feet apart. So the idea is that fire is just dropping and losing energy as it gets closer to your structure. And our Sonoran Desert, we've got some really good choices for plants. All the native Sonoran Desert plants are good in this area. I'm a big fan of the Chinese pistache, really excellent fall color, and low maintenance. Desert willow works well. The mesquite, and I really like the South American mesquites, the Argentinian or Chilean mesquites. They grow into a really nice tree. Palo verde, acacias, hackberry, the evergreen elm, and some people have issues with the sisu tree, but it's still a nice tree that would be considered Firewise. Okay, so I'm going to wind it down here with my page of resources and materials. And I'll just go through those here briefly so that you have a time to take a picture or a screen save on that. But that Be Ember Aware checklist is available right here at my website, Protect Your Home from Wildfire. We have a publication called Living with Wildfire, Homeowners Firewise Guide for Arizona. Here's the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association plant list that I've been referring to. The Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, and the Arizona Fire Adapted Communities, and me at ckjones@arizona.edu. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And with that, we're going to bring this to a close, and just want to ask if you will open up that webinar link there, fill out that brief survey. It's really only going to take you about 1 minute to 2. And if you've got any questions for me, put that, raise your hand, and I'm going to allow you to speak because it's just us and we can have a little discussion here. Thank you. There we go. All right, thank you, Dick. Dick, I think you're ready to go.
Chris, I tuned in this morning because, um, like I said, I'm a homeowner up here in Pine, and I've got ponderosa pine forest basically on my lot, about an acre lot. And the people I bought it from did a pretty good job of getting ready as far as firewising it, but I'm about to embark on improving those preparations myself. In the immediate zone, I've got some things I already know I'm going to have to deal with, like manzanita and things like that, and the intermediate zone for that matter. But in the immediate zone, I also have two great big Arizona oak trees growing right next to my deck.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking it might be a good idea for me to just take those out completely. But I can, there's not much in the way of ladder fuel anywhere near them. I don't have any problem with grasses so far. Once I clear the manzanita out of the way, there wouldn't be anything else around them. So question one would be, what do you think of that? And then question two, I'm wondering about crown fires. Can crown fires be caused by flying embers as well as ladder fuels? Are they usually just caused by ladder fuels?
First, I'll answer that one about crown fires. They are typically started by ladder fuels because those embers have to be able to find some place in those treetops to ignite. Now, that's not to say they can't do that. So it would be particularly what I think of a witch's broom. You know, we've had some mistletoe issues in the pines. That might create some conditions in a tree that, you know, the embers can catch on to and hold. But when we have these large wildfires, there's a wind direction, and when that wind goes that direction, it does a lot of preheating on those trees and plants that are in front of them. And then when those the flames and the heat gets there, it's already kind of set up to burn. So there's a lot of things going on in a real wildfire than to think that we're going to get a crown fire from embers. And I am hoping that, you know, you would need to have a home assessment, have a firefighter or one of these advisors take a look at the configuration of those oaks. And I'm assuming they're emery oaks that you have at the home. Is it an evergreen, Dick? Does it, or is it a gamble and drops the leaves?
It's not a gamble, but it's not evergreen either. It drops its leaves in the spring. We joke about it. It's a mixed up Arizona oak that drops its leaves in the spring and grows new ones immediately.
We have one called Arizona white oak. Maybe that's what you're talking about. Okay.
That's it. Yep.
And is maintaining those dropping leaves kind of difficult?
No, I don't have a problem with that. And I've also, they're already, all the branches have been removed up about 8 or 10 feet. So that's not a problem. It's just that the trunks are within a couple feet of my Trex deck.
Mm-hmm.
And I even removed a couple branches that were overhanging the roof.
Good.
But I've got a couple branches left that overhang the deck. So I don't know. I wasn't sure what a wise decision would be with those guys.
I think you're going to have people from both points of where a firefighter is going to say that looks well mitigated, or, you know, under the worst conditions, we're not going to be able to do something about your home and it may actually be a risk. So you've got those two types of things going on. Now, one great thing you have in pine strawberry is the pine strawberry fuel reduction nonprofit.
Yes.
You've got some great people in your community who will take the time to come out and make a visit with you and talk about exactly what to do with that tree.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to recommend. If you're familiar with them, find a phone number, and if you get to meet Mike and Janet Brandt, super people, and they'll let you know what they would say. And I would do anything they tell you.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. The thought in my mind was, I'm going to I know of a lot of cleanup work I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I was thinking of calling somebody at the fire department, but I'll just call the fuel reduction people and get them out here, see what they think.
Super. Hey, Dick, thank you for being with me. Jordan, Michael, if you have anything to ask, just put your hand up. We're just a handful of us here, so okay. Michael, good to have you with us.
Hi, Chris. So as you know, this summer we had quite a lot of growth of annual summer well, maybe not wildflowers, but various vegetation that were chiefly annual summer growers with the strong monsoon that much of the state had. And now that's left a lot of dried plant material out there. Now, usually when we're talking about fire hazards, we talk about the winter fuels. What do you think about these fuels that built up in the summer going into the winter? Is it less likely to create a fire danger? Is a lot of that going to break down by the time we get to summer again?
No, I think it's going to be the same story. Michael, it's going to take, I mean, depending on the species that are out there, if they're like 6 weeks grama, some of those may break down anyway, but I'm expecting that unless we get some good moisture or cold enough to get a little snow to stand for a little bit, those lignans aren't going to break down and they're still going to be standing.
Now, anecdotally, what I noticed over the summer was with the increased humidity and moisture, there was a tremendous amount of termite activity. So that presumably will have reduced some of the dried woody matter that's out there.
Yeah, but as long as we can observe it standing out there, it's going to be fuel, and so I'm really concerned that it's not going to have a chance to break down. It's going to be available for fuel when the fire season comes in the spring. The other thing that what I've been observing is when we get these wildfires in the Sonoran Desert, or if it's from the wind or what, but I think that Sonoran Desert soils can get disturbed by those fires. And then that just makes it a lot easier for these non-native seeds to establish and come up each year. I think I heard, big fires beget bigger fires is one thing I'd heard. And that's just seems to be what I'm observing. Particularly across the Tonto Basin. We've had across the Tonto Basin, we had the Willow Fire back in 2006 or 7, the Edge Fire, and the Salt Fire. We've had all these recent fires. And so as those occur, and then you look out into the deserts, those non-native grasses just keep coming back. So it looks like I lost our other presenters, Michael. So I think I'm going to go ahead and close this presentation down, and we'll see if anybody comes next week. Thank you. All right, so thank you everybody for your time today. We just had our Q&A, so thank you very much. And please join me next week. This will be my last webinar of the year. And I'm actually going to take advantage of it as an opportunity to do a little ripple effect discussion. I'd like to see if people have participated in these webinars, how they've had an impact. It's actually going to be a meeting. And so I'm going to ask people to register so that we can have a discussion. So with that, everybody have a good day, and I'll see you again soon. Oops, I should have gone ahead.